Hello and welcome to this video on the competitive environment and market structures. So far in this series of videos we've been looking at how external factors and influences can affect our business. For example, the economic environment and legislation. In this video we're going to look at the impact of competition, the impact of other businesses in the same market as the business we're looking at. Our objectives in this video are to look at what is meant by competitive advantage. There are 4 different types of market structure that we need to be aware of, and lastly, how these market structures might affect businesses within those different markets. Let's start off then. I've said this word quite a few times so far. What is a market? Well, this would be a good example. We would define a market as somewhere where buyers and sellers meet to exchange goods or services. More generally, where all the transactions take place for the same type of good or service. So for example, we have a smartphone market, all the different businesses that sell smartphones. We have a car market, all the different brands and makes of cars form the car market. There is a market for supermarkets, and there is a market for sportswear. All the different companies, buyers and sellers within that marketplace for the same type of product. We're going to look at a few definitions now. So 3 in total to take down. The first one is, what do we mean by the term competitive environment? Well, competition, but in a business sense. So the competitive environment is the degree of competition in the market and the buying and selling power of customers and suppliers within that market. So the degree of competition, how fierce is the competition, how many competitors are there, how important is the power that the customers and the suppliers have within that market. All these factors can influence what's known as the competitive environment. Our second key term is competitive advantage. A competitive advantage is a feature of a business that allows it to perform more successfully than the others in the market. More specifically, a situation where a business has an advantage over its competitors by being able to offer better value, quality and or service. So there's something that makes the business stand out from the crowd, like this happy little fella. Our third definition is competitiveness. Competitiveness is the ability of a business to sell its products more successfully than other businesses in the same market, and maybe comes about because it has a competitive advantage. Usually competitiveness is determined by price or the quality of the product or service. So we looked at what is meant by competitive advantage in a few key terms. Now let's move on to look at these 4 different market structures. So we have 4 market structures. These are 4 key terms or 4 descriptions that we would use to describe the level of competition or characterize what's happening in a particular market. And there's a scale here where they range from perfect competition, imperfect competition, oligopoly, not oligopoly, and monopoly. And these 4 key terms describe levels of competition we might see within a market. For example, the car market or the phone market or the supermarket market, whatever it might be. We're going to put together a table here, so it might be worth taking down in your notes and look at the characteristics of each of these 4 key terms. We're going to look at the characteristics in terms of the left-hand column. So how many businesses would we expect to see in a market like this? Secondly, barriers to entry. How easy is it to enter the market? Is there a lot of costs involved? We have to build a lot of infrastructure, or is that the relatively few barriers to entry? It's actually quite easy to set up a business in this particular market. How different are the products within that market? And then any additional notes. So we're going to start off with monopoly. Not that monopoly silly. A monopoly market structure. Now, a monopoly market structure has one main business within the market. Often it's quite difficult to enter the market here. Lots of costs involved in setting up in this type of market. And as there's only one business, there's only really one product to choose from. So in this situation, our business is likely to be a price setter, has a lot of power and control over the prices that it sets in the market. Can you think of any businesses that might be operating in a market like this? Well, this might be one. Water companies are often monopolies. If you think about your tap water, your mains water, you have little choice. There is only one company providing the supplies to that house, so they have a lot of power over what they can charge. And as a result, actually the government regulate the prices that they can charge to customers. Our second market is oligopoly, which derives from Latin, oli meaning few. And so in this sort of market we have a few businesses. Again, the barriers to entry are quite high, it's quite difficult to set up. The products are all slightly different or all different. And because we have a few large customers, businesses, there is a risk that they might agree prices between them, or that they might not really compete on price. Because if they did, if one business lowered its price, it's quite likely another business would just match its lower price, and so neither company would gain. Can we think of any markets where you would say there's a few large businesses that dominate the market? How about this one, the telecommunications market? There are a few large businesses that dominate the market, and so they tend, and it's quite expensive to enter this market. It's high barriers to entry. Now let's move on and look at imperfect competition. Now in this market we have many businesses, and it's relatively easy to set up a business in that industry. The products are all slightly different to each other, so they can have some ability to charge different prices. Some ability to say, well, my product's different to the other business products, therefore I get with a different price. Can you think of any industries or groups of businesses that you would say represent that type of market? Well, an example might be a small high street restaurant, a local independent restaurant. There might be lots of them on the high street, and they're all slightly different, so they can all charge slightly different prices. Now you wouldn't say there's a few large firms dominating the whole market, and it is relatively easy to set up a restaurant compared to a national water company or a telecommunications company. So we would describe the level of competition in the high street restaurant market as being imperfect competition, or sometimes it's called monopolistic rather than monopoly competition. Our final market structure is perfect competition. In this market we have many businesses. It's relatively easy to start up. The products are all the same, and because the products are all the same, we can't distinguish between them and charge a price for those different products. They have to all be set at the market price. These are price taking companies, they're price takers. When products are all the same, we describe that often as being the products being homogeneous, being the same as each other. Now this is going to be tricky. Can you think of any markets where it's relatively easy to set up, there's lots of businesses, and the products are all, broadly speaking, the same? Well, one example might be agricultural products. It's relatively easy to grab some seeds and plant them in an allotment and then sell those products. The products from one farmer, the peppers from one farmer, are not particularly different to the peppers from another farmer, so you can't justify a much more different price. And there are lots of different farmers competing in the market. So that might be a good example of a market that illustrates perfect competition. So here we go, we have our 4 different key terms that we use to describe markets. So you might want to think of a market for yourself, maybe the car market or the supermarket market or the hairdresser's market, and decide, right, which market structure do I think describes what's going on in that marketplace the best. So effectively we have a scale from lots of competition, many companies, and little ability to set their own prices, and the number of companies decreases as we go up the scale till we get monopoly, one company, and they have a lot of power over the price they set. So as we move from left to right along the scale, perfect, imperfect, oligopoly, monopoly, these different markets are increasing the market concentration. And by concentration we mean the extent to which a few businesses take up a large proportion of the market share. So we've described the 4 different types of market structure. Let's have a quick think about how these market structures might affect the businesses in those markets. First of all, let's think about price. If there are a few competitors, then these businesses have maybe more control over the price that they set. Whereas if there are more competitors, then your strategy might be more that you're a price taker. You have little influence over the price that you can charge. What about profit? Again, fewer competitors, a greater scope for making large profits, whereas more competitors, the profits are more shared around, and it's likely you'll be making a lower level of profit. What about the impact of these market structures on innovation and product range? Well, if there's few competitors, is there really an incentive to innovate and come up with new ideas and technologies? Or perhaps you might turn around and say, well, actually, if you're making very large profits, then there is a scope for investing in research and development, and the profit is there to allow that to happen. If there's more competition, there's also an incentive to differentiate yourself perhaps from your rivals. In terms of the product range, it's important to match the range of products of rivals. And if a rival brings out a product, how should the business respond? You could gain a competitive advantage by bringing out a new product, but it could also be risky if the product were to fail. That's it. It's over.